Recently the church put out a new encyclical written by Pope Leo XIV. And I don't know if it was this last weekend that it went out, but it's in the last 10 days. And I think it actually goes very beautifully. I think there was another reason why they put it out, but I think it actually goes quite beautifully with the solemnity that we celebrate this weekend. This weekend, we celebrate the Most Holy Trinity, which is actually the name of my home parish, so it's a particular feast day for me and my family. And we celebrate the goodness that God is a community of persons. The encyclical that came out is called Magnificat Humanis, which in English we would translate that as Magnificent Humanity. In Latin, the word order does not mean exactly the same thing that it does in English, so it also could mean humanity magnified. So what is an encyclical? An encyclical is a letter that the Pope writes. We see early in the church that St. Paul began to write letters to different church communities. St. Peter does the same. We see early church popes doing this, and just bishops generally writing letters to their diocese. Actually, every month, on the 23rd of every month, Bishop Lou writes a letter to all the priests of the diocese. He was ordained on the 23rd of whatever month he was ordained. So the 23rd of every month, he now writes a letter to all of us, just his thoughts and reflections on different things. So it's not an uncommon thing. So the Pope is ultimately doing something that the Church has always done. And in fact, a lot of our understanding of Church today is based off a lot of those letters that were written then. Obviously, not all of them are scriptural things, but we learned a lot of the early Church from the letters that are written of those early popes and bishops. So things like papal authority, we see very clearly written in the early Church letters. Also things like the Eucharist, the true presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, how Mass, the order of Mass that it goes. So there's a lot of really cool things that we learn in the early church letters that were put out. So a letter, again, an encyclical, is just a letter that's written by the Holy Father that's then circulated to the whole church to talk on some topic. Different popes write different numbers of encyclicals. John Paul II wrote 14 encyclicals in his 27 years of being the Pope. Benedict XVI wrote 3 encyclicals. Pope Francis wrote 4. It's commonly believed that his first one was written in a very similar style as Pope Benedict XVI, and so it's believed that Pope Benedict XVI actually wrote it, and Francis is just the one who signed off on it. Pope Leo XIV has written his first one. He takes his name because of Pope Leo XIII. Pope Leo XIII did a lot in the church in the time that he was Pope. Pope Leo XIII wrote 88 encyclicals. Obviously, so Pope Leo XIII reigned from 1878 until 1903. A lot was going on in the world in that time. And so a lot of Pope Leo XIII's letters dealt with the dignity of the human person, and the dignity of work, and the dignity of workers, and things like that. And so what do we read as the title? The actual title of the encyclical is Encyclical Letter Magnificata Humanis of His Holiness Pope Leo XIV on safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. So what is most everyone talking about with the article? Artificial intelligence. What is the article about? Safeguarding the human person during the time of artificial intelligence. So there is a lot of writing in there about artificial intelligence, but that's not the main point of it. The main point of the article is to talk about Catholic social teaching, human dignity, moral, spiritual, and cultural challenges to emerging technology even within the church. That's really what he's talking about. I always warn people that whenever the Pope puts anything out, or when the Church puts anything out, notice what news source you're hearing from. I know that we expect news sources to just comment on what's happening, but unfortunately in 2026, most of the time that's not the case. So I think that a lot of news sites, most major news sites, have an agenda that they're trying to put across, even when it comes to church things. So one of the phrases that they'll use that that Pope Leo uses as a very Catholic phrase is called social justice. Now again, in 2026, just universally, culturally, that means something, but in the church it actually means something a little bit different. And so we interchange those phrases, but we mean different things in different contexts. So just a little bit of background of social justice. Probably 2,000 years before, probably 1,000 years before Jesus, there was a philosopher named Plato. Plato wrote a very famous work called Plato's Republic, and he's writing about this perfect society. And in it, he writes largely in the first part of the book about justice. What is justice? So they can actually have a just society. So for Plato, justice was, within a society, every part of the society doing its part and receiving its part. And so everyone has a responsibility in a just society to the society of making it just. And so someone who has natural abilities to be a plumber should be a plumber. Everyone who has the natural abilities to be a teacher should be a teacher. Everyone who has a natural ability to farm should be a farmer. There are a couple of groups that can't, or there's one group that doesn't provide for the society as a whole, and one group that can't. The group that doesn't apply to the goodness of society, the just society, are like thieves, robbers, people who do unjust things. And so the society then gives that person or that group justice by imprisoning them or fining them or whatever. There's another group that simply can't add to the justice of society. Those are people who just physically can't do the thing. So people who are too young, little kids, people who are too old and in the twilight of their years, or people who are mentally handicapped. And so a just society also still takes care of those who just simply can't provide. So when the church uses the phrase social justice, it means something different than what, again, culturally we oftentimes mean for that phrase. And so Pope Leo XIV is talking about the dignity of the human person in this time period. And so just want to read a couple little parts from here. We jump very well into the document. This is paragraph 118. This is why I think it relates to this weekend. He says, "Our relationship with life seems to be in crisis today. Everything appears as a limit. Incapacity, illness, old age, suffering, vulnerability tends to be seen primarily as a defect to be corrected." Paragraph 119, it says, "It is precisely within our limitations that the following find a place: compassion, as well as a sincere concern for the needs of others. A generosity that can emerge even in the midst of darkness and failure, spiritual experience, and the worship of God. We see this in the many moments when our limits become tangible, when we face rejection, when we suffer the illness of loss or a loved one, when we encounter our own weakness or failure. Mysteriously, it is precisely in such moments that we can discover a new wisdom, tangibly experience the closeness of others, and encounter the presence of the Lord." Right, so it's in our limitations, right, that we get to then weigh on others in a good way, and also weigh on God in a good way. It's even in the midst of suffering that we get to have a new experience with community and with God. It says here, this is paragraph 169. It says, "Social ties must be supported with networks and educational communities that accompany life choices and prevent uncertainty from giving rise to loneliness or addictions." So I don't think it's a shock to you that we see a rise in technology in the world right now. It's been that way for quite some time. With all that, we've actually seen a rise in loneliness and depression. So the Pope is writing to a society that is struggling with loneliness. In the age where we're constantly connected, we see a rise of loneliness. There's a research firm, it's not a Christian firm by any means, called the Cigna, and they do reports every year on different things. In 2025, they did a report on the loneliness of America. So all the data is based on 2024. It says overall 57% of Americans feel lonely. Over half of Americans feel and experience loneliness frequently. It breaks down the generations. Gen Z, which is born from 1997 to 2006, Generation Z experiences loneliness 67%. Millennials, my generation, 65%. Gen X, which is 1965 through 1980, is 60%. Baby boomers is 1946 through 1964, 44%. So we see a very clear rise as the generations go on and more technology is dependent upon with loneliness. We also see a rise in each of those generations with a need and dependency on technology. So not that long ago, I was with some young adults, and this boy did not realize that this girl had a crush on him. And so I said to the boy, "You should talk to this girl." And he said, "Oh, I didn't even notice that she liked me." I said, "That's the problem." So he pulled out his phone. He started doing a thing on it, on his machine. And 40 seconds later, he said, "We're going on a date." I said, "That's all? That's all you had to do?" "Yeah." Boy, when I was younger, you had to walk up to the girl and risk being rejected right there in front of her. You just did it through the phone. Right? As the generations go on, more and more of their human interactions, if we want to call them that, are through machines. And that causes loneliness. Even though we have some type of connection, we still are alone because we still are alone when we do that, usually. Cigna cited at the very end of their report, consequences of loneliness go beyond a person's mental state. People living with high levels of social isolation and loneliness have a higher risk of developing chronic conditions, including depression, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and cancer, and an increased risk of premature death. We see a rising, an incline in the need and dependency on technology. We see the rise of an incline in loneliness and depression. We also see a rise in death. Right? We see this disconnect rising to the point of death. This weekend, we also celebrate, again, as I said, Holy Trinity, and we actually hear this psalm this weekend that we sang very beautifully. But it's actually not a psalm this weekend. It's a canticle, and it's from the prophet Daniel. This is my probably favorite Old Testament story, but we actually never read the story on a Sunday in any church here. So Daniel, in the very beginning, they have, part of it, the reason why I love it so much is there's some really fun names to say in here. So we hear of, in chapter 2, that Nebuchadnezzar the king has this dream. He's the second Nebuchadnezzar. And he has this dream, and in the dream, there is this golden head, and then a silver torso, and then a bronze legs, and then clay feet. And it's mounted on this very secure rock. And upon breaking the legs of this statue, the whole thing crumbles. And so Nebuchadnezzar asks these four well-known prophets, Daniel, who the book is written after, and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, seriously, who doesn't want to say those names over and over and over? Anyway, and they interpret the dream for him. And they interpreted it as what's going to happen with his kingdom. He might be a good king, but as it goes down, it will become less of a good kingdom, and eventually that kingdom will collapse. And so we hear on chapter 3 of the prophet Daniel. We're going to read just a little bit of it. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar questioned them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you will not serve my God or worship the golden statue that I set up?" After the dream was interpreted and Nebuchadnezzar wanted to prove that he's a strong king, he erected a 90-foot tall golden structure, like a big cube, and placed it on a stone and told all the people of his kingdom, "You're going to worship this." And most all of them say yes, except for Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. And so now King Nebuchadnezzar is questioning the three. He says, "Now if you are ready to fall down and worship the statue I made, whenever you hear the sound of the horn," and he goes on a little bit more, "if not, you shall be instantly cast into the white-hot furnace, and who is the God who can deliver you from my hands?" So if they don't worship, he's going to put them in this white-hot furnace that they're surely going to die. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I mean, seriously, it's so much fun. Answer King Nebuchadnezzar, "There is no need for us to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, can save us from the white-hot furnace from your hands, O king, may he save us. But if not, you should know, O king, that we will not serve your God or worship any golden statue that you set up." Right? So if the king chooses to do that, they will rely on their God to either save them, but even if not, even if the God doesn't save them, they still know they're doing the right thing and they will suffer death. Nebuchadnezzar becomes livid and casts them into the fire, bound up. It then goes on here. We skip several lines. They offer this, they're in the fire, and they offer this 21-verse prayer, blessing God and all that he's done. They continue on, and they begin to sing this canticle, which is what the psalm is today. And it's something like 60 verses. They are really into both praying out loud while they're in this white-hot furnace and singing a canticle of praise to God for what he's doing while they're burning. It says, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar was startled and rose in haste, asking his counselors, 'Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?' 'Certainly, O king,' they answered. 'But,' he replied, 'I see 4 men unbound and unhurt walking in the fire, and the 4th looks like the Son of God.' Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, 'Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel to deliver his servants and trusted in him. They disobeyed the royal command and yielded their bodies rather than serve or worship any god except their own God.'" So King Nebuchadnezzar now has a conversion because he sees the goodness of God. What is the boldness of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They trusted that God was still going to reward them in some way for their faithfulness. They will be faithful, trusting that God will save them, but if not, they still know they're doing the right thing. Right? They have such community with God that they fear nothing, even when someone's going to put them to death because of it. They have utter dependence on each other, that they're going to do this together, and God. And we see that then the 4 of them stand very boldly in the fire. And that's a psalm that we read today. Again, the canticle we read. One last tangent, I promise, and then we'll get on with the rest of it. Have you ever heard of the Battle of Dunkirk? It was a battle at the very end. It actually happened right around these months in 1940 during the end of World War II. The Germans had essentially cornered the British in this town of Dunkirk in France. It's right on the coast. And the Germans very easily could have killed them. There was over 300,000 of these young soldiers, these young British soldiers that were there. And they knew death is imminent. The British did. And so they had one chance to get a telegram back to Britain to let them know of what was going on. And so they sent a 3-word telegram back to Britain to let them know. And that telegram was just simply, "But if not," referencing the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. again, if you've ever heard the story, knowing that these 300,000 young soldiers were ready to be picked up, but if not, they were going to stand their ground, even if it meant dying. And their parents and grandparents and neighbors and aunts and uncles got in their own personal boats and went across the English Canal and saved almost all of them. A few thousand of them still perished, but saved almost all of them, 300,000 of little boats going across the English Canal to care for their citizens, their countrymen. Right? There's a goodness in community. We see that in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Together, they stood very boldly. And as they stood very boldly, they did so with God. We know in the Trinity stands very boldly, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And they invite you and I into community with them, to stand very boldly in community. On this solemnity of the Most Holy Trinity, again, a particular feast day for me and my family, we are reminded of our necessity for community. That's why Pope Leo wrote the article, or the Encyclical. This summer, when there's a lot of really fun family things and community-like things, be a part of them. It's for your good, and it's for the other people's good also. We need community in this digital age. We need true communion and union and care for one another and a sense that we are in this together. There's a lot of things trying to separate us and divide us. Greater community is the answer.